Surely you know, we've been very lucky to have the same team for 13 years. And because of that, the people I work with are very close to Frank. But the question is, how did he manage to get along with everyone? How did he manage to bring us all together with such different personalities and get us to work so well together? Frank always had a unique way of making everyone feel comfortable. He was like a nail maker in a way. But there's one interesting thing I want to share with you. The people I work with have treated me like their little sister for over a decade on air. How did we achieve that level of bond? Join me as we explore the story behind this harmony in today's video. Don't forget to leave a comment with 1 if you relate to Frank Fritz or 0 if you have a different opinion. If you're curious about the truth behind this, make sure to hit like and subscribe to follow what happens next. American Pickers is not just a reality show about antique hunting. It's also a symbol of friendship and bond between 3 very different individuals. Mike Wolfe is the founder and driving force. Frank Fritz is his longtime best friend and trusted companion. And Danielle Colby, a sharp, multi-talented woman who manages the behind-the-scenes activities and keeps the team's spirit alive. Their authenticity and real energy gave the show its unique appeal, creating a nostalgic connection with millions of viewers across the U.S. and beyond. But nothing lasts forever when Frank suddenly stepped away from the show in 2020. The fan community was left in a void full of doubt, speculation, personal conflicts, health issues, conflicts of interest, even betrayal. But no one involved spoke out, and the prolonged silence only heightened the drama, fueling an unprecedented wave of public debate until recently when Mike Wolfe and Danielle Colby unexpectedly appeared in a public trial involving Frank Fritz, who is now under guardianship after a serious stroke. The truth began to be revealed. So what exactly was revealed? Let's explore the full story today in the courtroom. The courtroom wasn't large, but the eyes of millions of fans seemed to focus on this one historic moment. The neatly arranged seats, the legal notes in the hands of lawyers, and the thick atmosphere of emotion. This was not an ordinary trial. There was no explosion, no fierce confrontation between the parties. Instead, silence made way for the heartfelt words that had been held back for so long. Mike Wolfe walked in, his face clearly weary. His gray suit only made his tall, slender frame seem heavier. Danielle Colby, usually sharp and energetic, was now unusually silent. Her hair was neatly tied back, her makeup subtle, but her eyes were red. There were only a few words exchanged between them, but their presence together carried more meaning than any official statement. In a moment of silence, with only the sound of the judge flipping through papers and the watchful eyes of the court filling the space, everyone knew that what was about to be said was not just a legal procedure, but the story the public had been waiting 3 years to hear. This was not about a personal lawsuit or a property dispute, nor was it an ordinary media scandal. This was a hearing about the guardianship of Frank Fritz, the man who had stood by Mike for nearly 2 decades on national television. After suffering a stroke in 2022, Frank was no longer able to care for himself and now lives in isolation, depending on someone else to make decisions about his medical and financial matters on his behalf. In court documents, the names of Mike and Danielle appeared as individuals closely linked to Frank. Their lives and current situation are neither as defendants nor plaintiffs. They were simply 2 people carrying the regret of saying what perhaps they should have said long ago. Frank's legal representative did not oppose their presence. On the contrary, it was seen as an important part of clarifying the depth of their relationship with him, a crucial factor in the court's decision on who would be best suited to care for Frank in the future. Neither Mike nor Danielle spoke first. The first words came from Mike, not loud but clear and firm. "I'm not here today to defend myself, I'm here to apologize," he said, his voice trembling but his gaze unwavering. Danielle nodded, gripping his hand as if anchoring herself before the emotional wave. The atmosphere in the courtroom thickened, as if all sound had been drawn into a deep void. There was no clicking of the tape recorder, no focus on the ritual. People watching weren't witnessing a legal procedure. It was a public reckoning between those who had once considered each other family. According to Nielsen data, American Pickers garnered over 3 million views per episode at its peak between 2011 to 2014. That number proved how influential this trio had been, and now they were reunited, not on screen, but in a context no one had hoped for: a courtroom. Inside, there were no intense cross-examinations, only a judge listening, occasionally nodding slowly. She understood this wasn't a punitive trial, but a necessary space for those involved to face themselves and a friend who could no longer speak. Viewers, those who once thought they knew this trio, will finally hear everything from the people themselves, uncensored, unscripted, and completely human. Mike Wolfe's confession as he stood on the witness stand was not of the brash man who once traveled across the country searching for treasure hidden in old garages and rundown barns. That day, he stood as a failed friend, a man who missed the chance to salvage a friendship more important than anything. He stood as a man who discarded the armor of fame to reveal what had been buried for so long. "I should have called Frank." "Mike." His voice started flat, but his familiar deep tone now choked with emotion. "I should have called him. I should have checked if he was okay, but I didn't." That confession echoed not only throughout the courtroom, but also in the minds of all who had followed their journey since the early days of the show. In nearly 300 episodes of American Pickers, Mike and Frank had been inseparable, their chemistry so strong they seemed to read each other's minds. But behind the scenes, viewers never saw the growing pressures, the tight filming schedules, the network expectations, and the burden of maintaining a successful TV brand. Mike didn't shy away from this. In fact, he admitted that the show's tremendous success had pulled him away from reality. "I let my career and work overshadow what was most important, my friendship with Frank." Viewers nodded, not necessarily in agreement, but in acknowledgement of a universal truth. Many have let the important things slip through their fingers in the pursuit of what seemed urgent. When Frank suddenly left the show in 2020 without saying goodbye, fans immediately felt the void. His absence was never explained, and Mike continued appearing solo on screen. After a few episodes, viewers began asking questions. Social media lit up with inquiries. Where is Frank? What happened? Mike and Frank had argued. Instead of answering, Mike chose silence, and in court he explained why. "I thought it would pass, that we would talk again, that everything would go back to normal, but I was wrong. I let the silence linger, and that silence deepened the rift." He glanced around the courtroom, his eyes stopping on an empty chair reserved for Frank. "If he were well enough to attend, I thought I'd have time," Mike said. "But none of us have as much time as we think." This was both a confession and a warning. Mike didn't stop at self-blame. For the first time, he openly admitted deeper issues behind the divide. "There were differences between Frank and me in how we worked, in the direction of the show, and in many personal matters. It came to a point where we couldn't communicate like we used to, and I didn't know how to bridge that gap." Frank had expressed his own disappointment in a brief 2021 interview with his son, saying he felt abandoned. "I haven't heard anything from Mike. Not a word." That statement stayed in the hearts of fans like a scar. Today, Mike confirmed that truth and offered no excuses. "I failed. I was too busy to do the right thing. I kept thinking I could call any time, never realizing there would come a day when that opportunity would be gone." Justifying them is a reflection of a man confronting himself in front of the public and a friend who can no longer respond. At one point in the trial, Mike looked up, not at the judge or the audience, but somewhere invisible. "Frank was not just a colleague. He was my childhood friend, someone who shared many things with me." His voice lowered. "I should have called him, and now the only place I can say this is here, in front of all of you, hoping somehow he can hear me." Media consultant Todd Harris, who has counseled many TV personalities going through crises, commented on Mike's statement, "It is rare to see a public figure admit their mistakes so openly without blaming circumstances or others." What Mike Wolfe did not only healed Frank, if he can still understand, but also the audience, who had loved them like a family. In his closing statement, Mike emphasized, "This is not an end. I don't expect the audience to forgive me right away. I don't expect Frank to understand everything. But I needed to say this because I couldn't live with the silence anymore." As Mike stepped down from the stand, the room fell silent once again. But this time, it was a different silence. Not of tension, but of reflection and the beginning of the truth. Danielle Colby, in the middle of the silent pain. If Mike Wolfe was the one stepping into the spotlight to face public scrutiny, then Danielle Colby was the one stepping out of the shadows where she had stood for 3 long years, caught in conflict and burdened by guilt. Becoming the silent pillars, Danielle is exactly that. Not traveling the highways of America like Mike and Frank, but leading behind the scenes, managing calls, contracts, and often emotional conversations. And precisely because she is in the middle of both ends, Danielle understands better than anyone the cracks forming within the group. When she arrived at the court, she didn't wear the glamorous performance outfits typical of variety shows or vintage fashion. She dressed simply, almost quietly, as if to ensure all attention was focused on the most important thing, being candid, the close friend who had been her companion for nearly 15 years. "I should have done more," Danielle said, her voice trembling but firm. "I was in the middle of them. I saw them change. I saw the distance grow, and I thought everything would be okay. I thought they would talk again, but they didn't. And I didn't do anything." Her confession touched hearts, not because it revealed an untold secret, but because it was a raw acknowledgement of a person's helplessness in witnessing a friendship fall apart during Frank's absence from the show. Danielle tried to remain neutral on her personal Instagram account, which has over 200,000 followers. She never posted anything to take sides or justify anyone. But according to close sources, Danielle had attempted several times to reconnect the two men through emails, messages, and even indirect messages through mutual friends, but nothing worked. "There were times I felt like a child in a family where the parents no longer spoke to each other," Danielle said, her gaze distant. "I didn't want to choose sides, but I couldn't ignore it. And eventually I chose silence. And that's what I regret." Clearly, her silence didn't stem from indifference but from fear. Fear of making things worse, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing both men at once. And so she chose to stay away, even though deep down she knew that only widened the gap. Media speculation had long suggested that Danielle had sided with Mike when she continued appearing in later seasons, but today in court, she denied that assumption. "I never chose sides. I stood by the memories of a time when the three of us were a team, a family. At that moment, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, not to read, but to hold as a source of comfort. I miss Frank. I miss when we used to laugh, argue, then have lunch together in the office. The little things. But now I can't call and tell him about them. Since Frank suffered a stroke in July 2022 and was placed under medical guardianship, all physical contact with him had been cut off. According to reports from Quad City Times, Frank was damaged in areas of the brain responsible for motor skills and memory, severely impairing his cognitive abilities. Danielle is one of the few granted visitation rights, but even those visits are rare, and not always does Frank recognize her. In a brief post on social media in 2023, Danielle shared a 30-second video of herself sitting in a car reading. I didn't want to film this, but I need to say that I miss Frank, and I wish everything could go back to the way it was. If Frank's story or Danielle's heartfelt words have touched you, feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to follow the unexpected twists of this emotional journey. The video attracted over 1 million views within 24 hours, a testament to how much the audience still cares about this friendship in court. She emphasized that continuing to work with Mike doesn't mean she chose him over Frank. Sometimes we have to move forward because life doesn't wait, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten anyone. A simple statement that resonated with many who found themselves in the same situation, caught between two people. It means something deep, and no one is entirely at fault. From a psychological perspective, social psychologist Dr. Laura Gibson of the University of Chicago noted, Danielle represents the image of a trapped mediator, a role full of emotional weight and often misunderstood. She has no decision-making power but must bear the emotional responsibility of both sides, which can lead to prolonged feelings of guilt, even when no direct wrongdoing has occurred. Danielle didn't cry in court, but her eyes conveyed more than any tears when she spoke of Frank. Her voice softened. I don't know if Frank can still hear, but if he's listening, I just want him to know I always think of him, and I'm sorry. I wasn't strong enough to keep the three of us together. In that moment, many in the courtroom reached for tissues, emotions flooding not because of flowery words, but because of a painful, simple truth. Sometimes in life, you don't need to betray someone to hurt them. All it takes is silence, and you unintentionally cause an irreparable crack. The untold behind-the-scenes story, outside the small screen where fans only saw happy moments, witty banter, and engaging antique negotiations. Another truth quietly revealed itself. According to testimony in court, both Mike and Danielle agreed that their relationship with Frank didn't break down because of a single incident. No behind-the-scenes scandals, no explosive fights, no acts of betrayal as the media speculated. Everything unfolded much more quietly, gradually, to the point where no one noticed until it was too late. I can't pinpoint exactly the day, the moment. There wasn't a decisive event, Mike said. Things happened slowly. Calls became less frequent. Conversations shorter. The silence lasted longer after each trip. What seemed like small changes were actually the earliest signs of a connection beginning to fade. According to creative partnership scholars like Professor Linda Hemmings of Yale University, there's a phenomenon known as silent erosion in long-term relationships. It's when no major conflicts occur, but the relationship weakens because changes in each individual are not acknowledged by the other. This seems to have happened with Mike and Frank. Mike became increasingly busy with expanding American Pickers licensing for consumer products and organizing large antique exhibitions. On the other hand, Frank remained rooted in his simpler lifestyle, focused on treasure hunting, and seemingly uninterested in commercial projects. Frank didn't like change. Danielle mentioned in court that he wanted everything to remain the same: his truck, working procedures, even his morning coffee routine. Meanwhile, Mike was always looking ahead. What began as a difference in style gradually grew into an ever-increasing gap. In 2018, Frank's health began to deteriorate, and he had to take a few weeks off for spinal treatment. Mike continued filming during this time, leading some fans to believe that Mike intentionally pushed Frank out of the show. No official statement was made at that time, but court documents reveal that it was the first time Frank felt replaced. "I remember when Frank had back surgery. We continued filming, and I thought he'd be fine, but I never asked him directly if he felt left behind. Now I know I should have," Mike said, his eyes downcast. That same year, part of the production team, those closest to Frank, were replaced. The feeling of losing his support system grew stronger. An anonymous crew member shared that Frank often sat alone between shots, no longer engaging in lively discussions. He had once been the biggest storyteller in the group, but in recent years, he hardly spoke. Danielle also noticed the change. "I talked to Mike a few times, and I told him Frank seemed to be pulling back, but we all thought it was just a phase." And complacency became the first step in a series of missed opportunities. Then, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, causing filming to stop. Everyone went home for nearly 8 months of interruption. Afterward, there were no messages, no calls between Mike and Frank. "I can't explain why," Mike said. "Maybe I thought Frank was angry, or he needed space. But I was wrong. We both were wrong. Frank never came back. No announcements, no official goodbyes, no social media posts." In 2021, news of his stroke spread through the media, and at that point, Mike and Danielle realized they had lost their friend long before the illness struck. "I realized I hadn't known anything about Frank for nearly 2 years, and that's terrible. Just terrible," Mike said in a hoarse voice. The court never asked Mike or Danielle to confess, but throughout their testimony, what caused the courtroom to fall completely silent was not the burden of legal obligation, but the weight of the truth. Sometimes all it takes is not reaching out, and even the ones we love most can quietly disappear from our lives, just like they quietly stepped off the screen. Frank Fritz, the silent friend at the center of the storm. When people think of antique hunters in America, the first image that comes to mind for millions of viewers isn't just the old trucks filled with antiques, but Frank Fritz, with his down-to-earth style, dry humor, and harmless bluntness. Frank wasn't as flashy as Mike, nor as dramatic as Danielle, but it was his simplicity and approachability that made him beloved. So when Frank suddenly disappeared from the show, it wasn't just a personnel change. It was an emotional loss, a void that no new face could truly fill. Frank never spoke up. He never made any public statements, nor did he offer any rebuttal. He quietly stepped out of the public eye, leaving fans with nothing but speculation. But that silence wasn't a choice. It was the result of a harsh reality. His health had deteriorated. According to the court documents, Frank suffered a serious stroke in July 2022, which left one side of his body paralyzed and damaged areas of his brain responsible for speech and short-term memory. He can no longer take care of himself, manage finances, or function independently. He now requires full legal guardianship. A man who once roamed through dozens of states and could identify every vintage car from the previous century now can't even remember the name of his doctor. This is a tragedy not only of illness, but also due to prolonged stress and an unhealthy lifestyle, and as Mike admitted, years of isolation and loneliness. "I've visited Frank," Danielle shared in court. "He doesn't always recognize me. Sometimes he smiles, sometimes he just stays silent. But every time I leave that room, I feel like a piece of my past has broken away." Frank has no wife or children. His closest relative, a cousin, is now listed as his legal guardian. But both Mike and Danielle are named in court documents as individuals with emotional and historical ties to Frank. "We won't let Frank be alone anymore," both Mike and Danielle said. Mike didn't stop at self-blame. For the first time, he publicly acknowledged deeper issues behind the rift. "There were differences between Frank and me in how we worked and in many personal matters, and it got to a point where we couldn't communicate like we used to, and I didn't know how to bridge that gap." Frank expressed his own frustration in a short 2021 interview with his son, saying he felt abandoned. "I haven't heard anything from Mike. Not a word." That statement stayed with fans like a scar. Today, Mike confirmed that truth and offered no excuses. "I failed. I was too busy to do the right thing," Mike said. "I thought I could call any time, but I never realized there would come a day when that opportunity would be gone." The court never asked Mike or Danielle to confess, but throughout their testimony, what caused the courtroom to fall completely silent was not the burden of legal obligation, but the weight of the truth. Sometimes all it takes is not reaching out, and even those we love most can quietly disappear from our lives just as they quietly step off the screen. Frank wasn't just a colleague, he was my childhood friend. "A man who's been through so much with me," Mike said, his eyes resting on a vacant chair meant for Frank. "If he were well enough to attend, I think I'd have time, but none of us have as much time as we think." Behind the laughter on screen, there are real people with emotions, wounds, and regrets. Mike and Danielle admitted their mistakes, with no legal moves, no blaming the circumstances or each other. They didn't make huge legal commitments, only sincere words, tearful apologies, and a solemn promise that they would no longer let Frank be alone. In most civil hearings, one side presents a petition while the other opposes it. But here, the most emotional moment came from the unspoken consensus that Frank deserved those who cared for him, who had truly loved him, even after making mistakes. When Danielle said, "I'm not here to win the guardianship battle. I'm here because I owe Frank an apology and a new promise." The courtroom was silent not only because of emotion, but also because of the truth. The court also played a role in dispelling rumors that the public had believed Mike and Frank were irreparably estranged, that Danielle had chosen sides, that their rift was due to money or fame. All of that was false. The truth is more complicated, painful, and humane. They were simply people who once loved each other, but no longer understood each other. When the media first reported on the case, many thought it was Mike's last attempt to fix his image. But after the hearing, public opinion changed. Not because of passionate speeches, but because they saw a real person who wasn't afraid to reveal their pain, who didn't try to soothe the press, but stood in the courtroom trying to heal the bond that once tied him to an old friend. The greatest value of this courtroom was not in the verdict, but in becoming a public right, speaking the truth in a society dominated by misinformation, edits, and PR. The rare moment when public figures step forward and speak the truth is what restores trust. And for the American Pickers fans, the truth is more valuable than any new season update. They didn't need more episodes. They just needed to know that Mike, Frank, and Danielle had once been something real. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't declare a winner. She just requested a follow-up medical report on Frank's condition and emphasized that all parties present today must continue to actively participate in Frank's life. A decision that was both legal and profoundly humane. As they left the courthouse, Mike didn't speak to reporters. Danielle only gave a slight nod to the press, but their eyes no longer looked away because they had finally said what needed to be said. Not to be immediately forgiven, but to start the slow process of healing, and perhaps even Frank, though he couldn't speak, felt that this was the final hope. The room with red eyes but determined steps is no longer the ending scene of a painful reunion, but the beginning, the start of a new commitment born from what once seemed irreparable. Throughout the hearing, through both words and demeanor, Mike and Danielle made it clear, unmistakably, that they were not there to seek forgiveness. They were there to change. No more empty apologies or glossy press statements. Instead, a heartfelt promise from human beings. We will not leave Frank alone anymore. Mike Long was criticized for his coldness and obsession with fame, declaring that he would visit Frank regularly, no matter his state of consciousness. "I can't change the past, but I can be present in the now, starting today," he said, a simple sentence, but for someone who typically remained silent and stepped back, it was a profound transformation. Danielle, who had long played the role of the peacekeeper, no longer stood in between, she stood beside him. "I will be there for Frank, whether he remembers me or not, whether we can talk or not. What matters is that he is no longer alone." Throughout their testimony, what made the courtroom silent wasn't the burden of legal duty, but the weight of truth. Sometimes all that is needed is not reaching out, and even those we love the most can quietly disappear from our lives, just as they quietly stepped out of the screen. Frank Fritz, the quiet friend at the heart of the storm. When people think of the American pickers, the first image that comes to mind for millions of viewers is not just the old trucks filled with antiques, but Frank Fritz with his simple style, dry humor, and harmless frankness. Frank was not just a colleague, he was my childhood friend, someone who shared so many things with me. His voice softened. I didn't call him, and now the only place I can say this is here, in front of all of you. Hopefully, somehow, he hears me. Mike admitted, "I failed. I was too busy to do the right thing. I kept thinking I could call any time without ever realizing that there would come a day when that opportunity would be gone." Life sometimes brings us the unexpected, and regrets may come too late. Mike's heartfelt words about Frank, a dear friend, serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of the relationships around us. Cherish the moments and never let opportunities slip by. What do you think about this story? What can we learn from these mistakes? Don't forget to leave a comment with 1 if you empathize with Frank Fritz, or 0 if you have a different opinion. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss other emotional stories. See you in the next video.